Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you here. It's Sunday, July 23, 2023. We are here to speak about a very special person, Mr. Hippolyte Dreyfus-Barney. With that being said, we want to introduce our speaker. Ms. Violetta Zein is an artist and graphic designer. She works for her family school in Pointe-Noire in the Republic of Congo. In 2020, Violetta and Adib Masumian launched the Utterance Project, a YouTube channel and website dedicated to sharing the beauty of the utterances of Baha'u'llah, the Bab, and Abdu'l-Bahá in the original Persian and Arabic, with English subtitles and transliteration. Violetta is the author of 3 illustrated chronologies on the central figures of the Baha'i faith, the Primal Point, the Blessed Beauty, and the Extraordinary Life of Abdu'l-Bahá. You can find all the publications and the 3 chronologies at www.theutteranceproject.com. With that being said, not only can you go to the Utterance Project, Violetta has been working on a series which she just finished the first week. This week, she, on the 21st, finished her 5th session on the Primal Point, a video series where you can watch the walkthrough, if you will, of this chronology on the Bab, and it will be continuing on August 1st. So you're welcome to catch up, watch those 5 sessions, and we'll be resuming and going forward with the next sessions on August 1st. With that being said, we welcome you, Violetta. The Clearwater Baha'is here welcome you for this beautiful presentation on this very beautiful soul, this luminary. And by the way, everyone, we watched a video recently at the Baha'i Center in Clearwater about Abdu'l-Bahá in France. And we're now talking about the first French Bahá'í. So we're coming in here, we're learning. We're so appreciative, Violetta, that we're able to do a deep dive on this amazing individual. Thank you.
Yeah. I have actually been working on this presentation for 6 months. I saw the date that I created. I always start with a Word document that I do all my research in. So I'm sure that I don't have any opinions. This is all from historians. And it was created in January 2023. So I've been working on this for 6 months because this is a story of absolute falling in love. The first time I remember ever wanting to learn more about, so in English you say Hippolyte Dreyfus, but I'm French, so I'm going to call him by his French name, which is Hippolyte Dreyfus. So the first time I ever remember wanting to know more about Hippolyte Dreyfus was in 2021. And my father was running a series of Sunday Zooms at the time called Storytelling Sundays. And he is the one who gave me the name he had created for his talks, for these talks with Clearwater. And this is my 15th collaboration with Clearwater. So on one of these Storytelling Sundays, my dad shared many wonderful and one absolutely hilarious story about Hippolyte Dreyfus. And these stories were from a newly published French biography. And when I was looking for a topic earlier in this year, I thought, wow, those were some wonderful stories. Maybe I could do that. And this is how this presentation was born. But first, some people may never even have heard of Hippolyte Dreyfus. So I want to begin this presentation with something that I had originally planned to put in the epilogue, but actually my dad said, no, this is so strong, you should start with this. These are the words of Shoghi Effendi, our beloved guardian, who knew Hippolyte Dreyfus most probably from early childhood, because Hippolyte Dreyfus came very early to the Holy Land to visit Abdu'l-Bahá, and Abdu'l-Bahā's family was always around him. And the guardian was very open and very close and intimate with Hippolyte Dreyfus. And these are the words that, it's just a single sentence from the guardian. And it tells us everything we need to know about the kind of person that Hippolyte Dreyfus was, the caliber of Baha'i he was, but also the caliber of person that he was. And these are all the words of Shoghi Effendi. I can say with confidence that no one among the Baha'is of the East and the West combined better than he the qualities of friendly and jovial camaraderie, of intimate knowledge of the many aspects of the cause, of wisdom in his judgments, and other very special skills. A deep understanding of the problems and conditions of the worlds. All his qualities, which made him such an adorable, precious, and useful collaborator and friend. That is the caliber of person we're going to look at today in detail. Now, this presentation today is a very, very brief, I insist, it's a brief sketch of a book that was written in 2021 by Yann Ballager in collaboration with Parivash Ardeï Amini, and published by the French bookstore. And he made many, many, many discoveries, found many photographs, and that book is nearly 260 or 300 pages. And this talk is maybe less than 10% of that. I mean, it's very, very, very short talk compared to the wealth in this book. And so this presentation is basically an introduction and an invitation to buy the book in English when it's published, when it's going to come out next year. You're going to discover so many more things. I also want to start by thanking the Archives Department of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of France for their permission to use 16 photographs from that book. And I want to thank Yann Ballager, the author himself, who is a good and dear friend, for making those photos available to me directly. So we're going to start with part one, which is Hippolyte discovers the faith. Hippolyte Isidore Dreyfus was born on April 12th, 1873 in Paris. He's very close to his younger sister Yvonne, and his parents were well off. One of the reasons why he was able to travel as much as he is going to travel in the next hour and a half that we're going to be together. He's traveling a lot, and because his family was wealthy and his wife's family also was very wealthy. So the whole family was well known in the Parisian cultural scene. And Hippolyte was very young when he found a lifelong passion for classical music. He was also born in the middle of Belle Époque, that late 19th century era when everything in Europe was in a profound flux that was caused by social, economic, and technological progress, but it was also very powerful in the arts, in music, in painting, especially in interior design and architecture. It was like this Renaissance kind of. By the time Hippolyte was 24 years old, he had a doctorate in law, and he began working for one of the most prestigious lawyers in Paris. He was also, from the very beginning, very passionate about social justice, and he dedicated his free time to social work and to doing what he could to alleviate the poverty around him. He was also very active in cultural, intellectual, and artistic circles in Paris, and considered himself an agnostic/materialist. But he was convinced that there had to be something more, and he began an ardent and sincere search for truth. At the time, there were only about 10 Baha'is in France, and all were centered around the very magnetic, radiant personality of May Bowles, the later May Maxwell, later the mother of Abdu'l-Bahá and she taught the faith to many of the early 20th century Baha'is in Paris. For example, Laura Barney, who would later marry our beloved Hippolyte Dreyfus, Thomas Breakwell, Marian Jack, among many, many others. Hippolyte left an impression on May Bowles, who described his gracefulness and his powerful majesty. After his first meeting with May, he was enthusiastic and he was very deeply touched. And 8 or 10 days later, he came back to see May and he was perturbed. He'd had very strange, unexplainable experiences. And it's the same with Thomas Breakwell. He also first met May, then had spiritual experience, then came back to declare, there was a lot of spiritual power coming through May Bowles. And one of the reasons I believe is that she was in constant touch with Abdu'l-Bahá. He constantly wrote to her. He guided her. He said, stay in Paris this summer. Don't go out of Paris this summer. Things like that. So she was very obedient. And I think that's why she was so efficient as a teacher. Little by little, Hippolyte's hesitations towards the faith gave way to acceptance. And he began reading everything he could find on the faith. On 22nd of June, 1902, that would be 10 days after the passing of Thomas Breakwell, Hippolyte received a response from Abdu'l-Bahá to his letter. And the response from Abdu'l-Bahá opened with the words, "O thou who art seeking illumination from the light of truth." Abdu'l-Bahá qualified Hippolyte's letter to him as eloquent, and spoke about his enlightened vision and his pure intention and his love for the beauty of God. You see, these are encouragements. These are spiritual encouragements, but also Abdu'l-Bahá was infallible, and he had perceived already in Hippolyte all of his qualities. And that sort of encouragement between Abdu'l-Bahá and Hippolyte, I'm going to mention it now because you're going to see it throughout the entire talk. Abdu'l-Bahá encourages Hippolyte until the very, very end. Hippolyte continued to devour everything he could find on the faith. He read constantly. He began spending time with the young Parisian Baha'i community, constantly being spiritually reinvigorated by the steady flow of tablets from Abdu'l-Bahá in the Holy Land, because Abdu'l-Bahá also wrote to the Parisian Baha'is as well. He would do that sometimes. And this young community received extraordinary visitors. Mirza Abul Fazl, who we looked at his beautiful life in 2 parts just a few weeks ago on the Clearwater Channel. He came and he transformed this community. So just excuse me 1 minute. I just need to drink something. It's
amazing nonetheless, all this that you've shared. So Hippolyte Dreyfus, from the very beginning, he was one of the first believers in the world, really, but in France, the first believer that was touched by May Bowles. So May Bowles,
not the first, because I think that he became a Baha'i, I think, about a year after Thomas Breakwell. But even if he's not the first or the second or the third, the kind of impact that May Bowles had on people was the kind of impact that she had on Thomas Breakwell and on Laura Barney and on Marion Jack and on Hippolyte Dreyfus. This is a woman who was detached from her own self, and she let Abdu'l-Bahá work through her. So the first believers in Paris, they became, all of them almost, disciples of Abdu'l-Bahá, and it's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. And the thing that's unbelievable is that Abdu'l-Bahá begins encouraging him in service in the faith and begins speaking to his spiritual station from the very first letter he writes to him. Okay, that's what's special about Hippolyte. Okay, so very, very quickly, right? Things move very quickly. You get the sense from Hippolyte that he is a extremely courteous man. He has flawless manners, flawless style. He is highly intelligent. A man has a doctorate in law, and he is extremely passionate, and he is humble because he would define himself as a materialist and an agnostic. But when he comes in contact with the faith, he goes head on, and he approaches it like at the same time intellectually, he devours everything he can find, but at the same time spiritually, he writes to Abdu'l-Bahá. And then when Abdu'l-Bahá writes to him, he is completely energized. And I don't know how long he waited. He must have gone immediately into pilgrimage, because by December 1902, Hippolyte Dreyfus and Edith Sanderson are invited to the Holy Land for a 3-week pilgrimage. And for 21 days, from morning to night, Hippolyte soaks in Abdu'l-Bahā's teachings and takes assiduous notes. And he forges a lifelong friendship with Dr. Yunus Khan Afrukhte, who was for 9 years at Abdu'l-Bahā's side in Akka, and from 1901 to 1909 or 1910, I think. And he wrote Memories of 9 Years in Akka. Now, one of the, I think probably the funniest pilgrimage story that has ever happened belongs to Hippolyte Dreyfus. So when Hippolyte was bathing in the Holy Land, he always made sure that the door of his room was completely locked when he bathed. And one day during his pilgrimage, he must have been so in the spiritual world, he forgot to check the lock on his door, and he started bathing. And then sometime after this, Abdu'l-Bahá had knocked at his door and called his name. And Hippolyte, forgetting that the door was unlocked, invited him in. And Abdu'l-Bahá walked in and saw, he came to face with Hippolyte completely naked, standing in front of Abdu'l-Bahá, totally naked. And by dinner, Hippolyte Dreyfus was still so embarrassed about this mix-up that Dr. Yunus Khan Afrukhte translated his shame to Abdu'l-Bahá, and Abdu'l-Bahá replied very funnily. I mean, she's teasing, of course, but it's magnificent what a response he gives. He says, tell Hippolyte, there is no shame. Because of my great love for him, I desire to behold the entirety of his physical being. I think that's so sweet. Abdu'l-Bahá had such a wonderful sense of humor. So during his pilgrimage, Hippolyte Dreyfus was often confused with a very, very famous Dreyfus in France, the Dreyfus affair. And he was not a relation to Hippolyte Dreyfus. And Abdu'l-Bahá, always aware of what was happening in the world, said to Hippolyte, that Dreyfus found renown in the world of politics. I desire for you even greater fame in service to the faith of God. And of course, we know that this is what is going to happen. Abdu'l-Bahá has just spoken what is going to become the life of Hippolyte, because Hippolyte will never stop serving. By the time Hippolyte's first pilgrimage ends, he was back in Paris and he was completely transformed. His time with Abdu'l-Bahá had convinced him of the social and global reach of the Baha'i message. And he had decided upon his return to Paris that he was going to dedicate the rest of his life to its service. And so, like I said earlier, he began immediately studying Persian and Arabic in order to speak directly with Abdu'l-Bahá without an interpreter, and gain access to the original texts of the Baha'i writings. And I think in that you can see that he's really thinking like a lawyer, He has this case, and the case that he has is that he wants to dedicate the rest of his life's service to the faith. And in order for that case, he needs tools for defense. And the tools that he needs, one of them is language. And so he needs to learn Persian and Arabic, and he also needs to master the teachings and master the writings in their original language, which rejoins learning Persian and Arabic, not just to speak to Abdu'l-Bahá, but to access the writings himself. Abdu'l-Bahá called Hippolyte a bird amidst the birds of paradise, who would soon warble stunning melodies and propagate the message of Baha'u'llah widely. And from Abdu'l-Bahá would flow a very steady stream of warm and constant encouragement to Hippolyte, dozens upon dozens of letters. And this is the type of content you're going to get in the book that you're not going to get in my talk. I am not going to quote these letters over and over again. I might quote a few words from them, but in the book, you will see the intensity and the intimacy of these letters of Baha'u'llah. Part 2, India and Burma. Before we get to that, I have a few little vignettes, I think. In 1902, Nasruddin Shah's successor, Muzaffaruddin Shah, weak and timid, extravagant and lavish, planned a visit to Paris. Abdu'l-Bahá asked Lua Getzinger and Mariam Haney to present him with a petition to protect the Baha'is of Persia and allow Abdu'l-Bahá to leave the confines of Akka. Today, in 2023, this is the type of work that we give to Office of External Affairs. So when you come across Lua Getzinger and Mariam Haney later on in your readings on the history of the faith, know that they were considered like offices of external affairs by Abdu'l-Bahá. He gave them this very sensitive mission, very confidential and sensitive. Hippolyte Dreyfus was instrumental in obtaining that meeting, and he spoke to the Shah himself with great firmness and courage during the interview. In 1903, after the massacres and persecutions in Yazd, Iran, and in Esfahan, another petition was widely signed and circulated. And that put pressure, and eventually persecution eventually began to subside. By 1904, Abdu'l-Bahá sent Dr. Younes Afroukhte to Paris to consolidate the community. Abdu'l-Bahá would do this on 4 separate occasions, I believe. He would send very deepened, very spiritual, very wonderful, deepened Baha'is, among which Younes Khan Afroukhte, who was probably in his 5th year with Abdu'l-Bahá in the Holy Land at that time. And the very last of those visitors would be Mirza Abul Fazl, as we saw in that talk of last month. So Younes Khan Afroukhte arrived in Paris, and he described to Abdu'l-Bahá Hippolyte Dreyfus as the center and essence of the fire of the cause in the French capital. On March 1st, 1904, Hippolyte Dreyfus gives his first talk to the general public at the School of High Social Studies of Paris. This is not a nothing school. This is a very important school. And the subject was Babiism and Baha'ism. Soon after, with the help of his dear friend Mirza Habibullah Afnan, Hippolyte completed his first French translation, the Kitab-i-Iqan, or the Book of Certitude, revealed by Baha'u'llah in Baghdad. And you can see the front page of the original first edition on the screen. And that house is his family house in Switzerland. I believe that is where he wrote part of that book. Dreyfus's translation is well received among Orientalists and the public. Critics call it an excellent translation and describe the contents as highly elevated mysticism. The year after, in 1905, Hippolyte Dreyfus and Sidney Sprague, whom you see on the screen here, were the very first Western Baha'is to travel to Southeast Asia. And Abdu'l-Bahá chose them specifically because they embodied Europe and North America, because Hippolyte Dreyfus was from France and Sidney Sprague, I believe, was American. And they were to not only teach the faith on the one hand, but on the other hand, to foster unity with their Asian brothers and sisters. On his way to India, Hippolyte spent 5 days in the Holy Land. So that's his second pilgrimage, including Nowruz 1905. And he had the bounty of seeing Abdu'l-Bahá every day and spending time with Mirza Abul Fazl, whom he had met 3 years prior in Paris. So on the 7th of April, 1905, Hippolyte Dreyfus arrives in Bombay, and what follows are about 4 weeks of very intense and very productive days, because 4 intense and very productive weeks, I'm sorry. And he makes many, many contacts among the consuls and the French nationals, local political and intellectual figures, such as the Indian poet Behramji Malabari and Nafroji Dorabji Khandelwala. And I was only able to find a picture for Behrami Malabari, but he is one person that Hippolyte Dreyfus spoke to. He also addressed the Theosophical Society twice and found time in his busy schedule to spend time with local Baha'is. Now they moved to Burma, which is, they went, you can see along the bottom of India here, they went all the way to Calcutta and then sailed to Rangoon. And Rangoon and Mandalay are both in Burma. The Baha'i community in Burma is very, very old. If you remember, they were so consolidated that they were able to, at the request of Abdu'l-Bahá, build not only the sarcophagus, but also the coffin for the remains of the Bab in 1909. So they're a very diverse community. They comprise every social strata of the social class and every religious background. And there are many religions in Burma. There are Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. And the Baha'is are in every strata. Part 3, Iran. Hippolyte returned to Paris through India. And when he arrived, he had quite a surprise. His photographer, when he gave him to develop his photographs, his photographer told him, these are all fakes. And Hippolyte was very surprised indeed. He said, how come they're fakes? And the photographer explained to him, because he must have been kind of an anthropologist. He said, look, you have these photographs from India, but the problem is you have these photos from people who are of obviously different castes on the same photograph. And a photograph like this could not have been taken in India because they would have all killed each other. And Hippolyte is like, you make a very good point. However, he had to explain to him that these people, even though they were of different castes, were no longer Hindus. They were now Baha'is. And liberated by the teachings of Baha'u'llah, they had been united by the bonds of friendship, and therefore they could stand in the same photograph and not kill each other, basically. So when he returned from India, something must have changed for Hippolyte after his travels to India and Burma, and he decided to focus on becoming a man of letters and writing and translating, and asked to be struck from the order of lawyers in France. And he started corresponding regularly with very eminent Orientalists like A.L.M. Nicolas, who basically was a Babi. He never really accepted Baha'u'llah, but he is quoted. He's the most often quoted in the footnotes of the Dawnbreakers by The Guardian in the original French, if you've ever noticed that. That's always A.L.M. Nicolas. And he always corresponded, Hippolyte also corresponded with Edward Granville Brown, who was also an Orientalist, who also did not perceive the reality of Baha'u'llah's glory and stayed very attached to the Bab and to Mirza Yahya as a Babi, kind of like they both really liked the Babi faith very much. And Hippolyte also translated translated the hidden words and published them. And you can see here this is the front page of the first edition of the Hidden Words translated by Hippolyte Dreyfus. He also translated the 7 Valleys and 2 tablets from Baha'u'llah, all of which, once again, were very well received by critics and scholars. And you can read many more details on his translations and on the reception and articles written praising his translations in the biography. In 1906, Abdu'l-Bahá specifically asked Hippolyte to go to Iran to meet and encourage the dispersed community of believers throughout the country. Also, the Iranian believers at this point have been persecuted, viciously murdered, and deprived of their freedom and deprived and stripped of their property. And so this is not just, this is bringing them love directly from Abdu'l-Bahá, who tragically would never be able to set foot in his native land again. So Hippolyte is carrying with him the spirit of Abdu'l-Bahá, the love of Abdu'l-Bahá in the shape of a person coming to visit all the communities in Iran, as many as they can. So he takes the Orient Express to Istanbul, and he is joined by 2 women, Emmanuelle Lachenay and Laura Barney, his future wife. And they are all 3 going to travel to Iran, which I think is quite remarkable. A single man and 2 single women traveling together to Iran, and them protected around the aura of Abdu'l-Bahá sending them there with this mission of basically a mission of love and encouragement. They travel north through Azerbaijan, Baku, which you see here above the picture, and Ishkabad and Samarkand. So they enter, they're going to probably sail from Baku, and then I'm imagining, again, you would have to go to the book for the details on that. But so when they arrive in Ishkabad, they are at the construction site of the first house of worship in Baha'i history in Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. And they are extremely struck by the atmosphere of the local Baha'i community. And that is a photograph of them in front of the building in construction. They are seated in the front. And Hippolyte Dreyfus is the one with a white hat, if you can see that. So on the 23rd of June, 1906, Hippolyte Dreyfus, Emmanuel Lachenay, and Lord Barney become the first 3 Western Baha'is to set foot in Iran. If you remember, Hippolyte Dreyfus was one of the first 2 Westerners ever to set foot in India and Burma. So he is now one of the first Westerners to go to India, to Burma, and to Iran. Just recapping, because that's kind of significant, and I never knew that about him. They are now in the cradle of the faith. They are in the native land of the Bab, the native land of Baha'u'llah, the native land of Abdu'l-Bahá. And from June to September, they follow Abdu'l-Bahā's instructions, and they visit so many cities. They visit all of these cities on the map here. So Anzali, Rasht, Malayir, Hamadan, Esfahan, Yazd, Razvin, where Tahirih was born, Tehran, Qom, Kashan, Tabriz, Milan, Mahkou. And it was not high-speed trains. I mean, it was complicated to travel in Iran at the time. So this is a photograph of them at dinner. I think Haji Amin is in the front, I believe. Hippolyte, Emmanuel, and Laura spend 2 intense weeks in Tehran, and they meet with Iranian authorities, ministers and princes, and they plead the cause of the faith. But they also spent time with Baha'is and consulted with the Tarbiyat school for boys. It's that famous school where you often see it with a picture that looks like a mountain of children, because they're all standing above one another. And it's one of the first Baha'i schools in the world, and they were trying to invite Western teachers to come and work at the school. So the 3 Westerners, the Hippolyte, Laura, and Emmanuel, they consulted with them on how to do that best. When Hippolyte returns to Paris, he receives a letter from Abdu'l-Bahá expressing how much joy his Iranian journey had brought him, and mentioning that the Iranian believers had sent Abdu'l-Bahá joyful letters recounting Hippolyte's eloquent talks. Abdu'l-Bahá encouraged Hippolyte to intensify his teaching efforts in Paris and organize devotional meetings to strengthen hearts and generate enthusiasm. I think that that's really important to see that intimate relationship between Abdu'l-Bahá and Hippolyte, because every time Hippolyte does something good and something successful, immediately Abdu'l-Bahá encourages him. And then he says, now work on this. And then when he does that well, Abdu'l-Bahá encourages him in really dynamic ways, and it probably made Hippolyte feel like he could fly. And every time Abdu'l-Bahá encouraged him to do something else, he would do that to the utmost perfection. And this is 1906, and this is when Abdu'l-Bahá writes him a letter and tells him, can you please try to do devotional meetings? In 6 years, when Abdu'l-Bahá arrives in Paris, Hippolyte and Laura have been holding these devotional meetings for 6 years now, basically. And Abdu'l-Bahá went as often as he could to their devotional meetings, but we're going to see that in the Paris section. So part 4, Paris, which is what we expected, given that the last instructions of Abdu'l-Bahá to Hippolyte Dreyfus was to work in Paris. So now we're going to look a little bit about his life in Paris. Shortly after his return, Hippolyte publishes. How much does he publish? He's translating and publishing constantly. This is extremely important. This is the first thing he publishes that is actually his writings on the faith. It's called Precepts of Baha'ism, and it's the first image here on the left. This is the front page of the first edition. It's a compilation that contains tablets of Baha'u'llah revealed after Kitab-i Aqdas, so Tajaliyat, Tarazat, Bisharat, all of those. And it's prefaced with an introduction to the faith written by Hippolyte. The same year, Hippolyte does something major, and that is these other two. I really looked very, very hard to find these for you guys. This is the cover of the encyclopedia called Le Larousse Illustré. It's an illustrated encyclopedia. And on the very right-hand side is the entry for Baha'ism. This is the first time that a definition of the Baha'i faith is used. And Hippolyte's concise and complete definition will be translated into English and used in the United States. That same year, very faithful to Abdu'l-Bahā's encouragement, Hippolyte begins giving talks in French to other French cities, including one of the biggest cities in France after Paris is Lyon. It's either the second or the third. And he is going to be the first person to teach the faith in the city of Lyon. So in 1908, Hippolyte visits Abdu'l-Bahá in Akka for the third time. And mainly one of the things that he wants to really understand is that he has the correct understanding of the monumental compilation of table talks compiled by his future wife, Laura Barney, that we now know as Some Answered Questions, because he is going to start translating it. So he wanted to get, probably at this point, he's speaking fluent Persian. So he's getting clarification from Abdu'l-Bahá in Persian. Now, when he leaves the Holy Land, he stops by Stuttgart and he encourages the activities of the German Baha'is. I am 100% sure that Abdu'l-Bahá asked him to do this because Abdu'l-Bahá loved the German Baha'is more than any other community, and he loved his time in Stuttgart in 1913. So there are sometimes you see in the travels of people like Mirza Abul Fazl, who went to the United States in 1901 to 1904, and in Paris in 1901, and Hippolyte Dreyfus in Stuttgart in 1908, you see that people that Abdu'l-Bahá really loves and respects go on the place that Abdu'l-Bahá is going to be in just 4 or 5 years. You know, when he leaves Akka and he goes to Egypt and then he goes to Europe, he goes to Paris, he goes to Stuttgart, he goes to Chicago, he goes to Washington, he goes to New York, all those places where Mirza Abul Fazl went. And so it's almost like they're preparing the way for him. They're preparing people spiritually, you know, because they come straight from him, you know. Mirza Abul Fazl is sent by Abdu'l-Bahá, and so is Hippolyte Dreyfus. And so that is an aspect of the faith that's extremely interesting, is the omniscience of Abdu'l-Bahá and how he decides to send people where he sends them. It's very, very, very wise and divinely guided, really. In 1909, Hippolyte Dreyfus publishes his most celebrated work, an introductory book on the Baha'i faith called Essay on Baha'ism. And it has 2 parts. One part is him retracing the history of the faith. And the other one is one of him expounding on the Baha'i teachings on politics, society, the individual, patriotism, and attitudes to work. This is directly, I believe, and it's a product of 2 things in Hippolyte Dreyfus. One, his high training as a lawyer, as a doctorate in law. And 2 is he spent countless hours with Abdu'l-Bahá in the Holy Land over 3 visits. And Abdu'l-Bahá has conveyed to him so well the teachings of the faith. And he puts them together. And you know what? The book is well received. It's called Attractive, Useful, and Optimistic. And Leo Tolstoy, pictured here. Now, this is the front page of that first edition of that book. Leo Tolstoy here had not reacted positively to other things that the Baha'is had sent him. But when he received Hippolyte's book, he had a completely different reaction. He was deeply impressed with the concepts of unity and Baha'u'llah's teachings on the danger of nationalism. And he recommended that book to his friends. So you see how Hippolyte is under the shadow of Abdu'l-Bahá, and he's extremely obedient and he's extremely intelligent, but he's also extremely humble. And he becomes a tool that is willingly does what Abdu'l-Bahá asks him to do. And when he does that, he gets so many confirmations. His translations are well reviewed, his books are well received, Leo Tolstoy likes his book, but that is because he is essentially deeply faithful and deeply humble. And in 1910, the Paris Baha'is receive a letter to the community from Abdu'l-Bahá, in which he encloses a few lines to Hippolyte's attention, telling him that his beautiful attitude, his good behavior, his firmness, and his constancy make him happy. Now think of the wisdom of Abdu'l-Bahá enclosing such an intensely intimate personal message to Hippolyte in a letter that is addressed to the Paris Baha'i community. Because if someone is very humble and they never make a noise of anything they're saying, then all of a sudden, the center of the covenant shines a light on this person. They're going to see him, you know? Maybe they weren't appreciating him. Part 5, the United States. So Hippolyte decides to travel to the United States in 1910 to meet and encourage Baha'i communities. And the Americans are going to fall in love with him and write him letters via his wife for many, many years to come. He goes to New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Montreal. And his talks are both eloquent and very invigorating. And when he comes back to Paris, I want somebody to unmute themselves and tell me what is waiting for him in Paris when he arrives. I'm waiting. A letter from
Abdu'l-Bahá.
Yes. When he returns to Paris, he receives a letter from Abdu'l-Bahá congratulating him on his successful teaching journey in America. What I like is the fact that mail was super slow in those days, as was travel. And it's very likely that Hippolyte arrived at home and a few days later, the letter arrived with not enough time for people in America to write to Abdu'l-Bahá and him to write to him. Abdu'l-Bahá write him the letter while he was on the steamer coming back before he had feedback from Americans. See, that's the omniscience of Abdu'l-Bahá. I mean, I'm reading a lot into it, but I'm, that has happened before, when May Bowles posted the letter of declaration of Thomas Breakwell, there was already a little blue cablegram waiting from Abdu'l-Bahá saying, you may leave Paris at any time, because he had told her to stay. But the summer that he stayed, we always say, oh, it was for Thomas Breakwell. It was for Thomas Breakwell. But that's also the summer that Hippolyte Dreyfus became a Baha'i, guys. It wasn't just Thomas Breakwell that became a Baha'i when Abdu'l-Bahá asked May Bowles to stay in Paris. It was also Hippolyte Dreyfus. He became a Baha'i that same summer. So but Abdu'l-Bahá told her to stay in Paris because there was work to do, not because Thomas Breakwell was going to become a Baha'i. So this is Sultan Hussein Mirza Jalaluddin, governor of Yazd, whom has been called in the Baha'i writings the tyrant of Yazd. Abdu'l-Bahá trusted Hippolyte Dreyfus and his very particular brand of diplomacy and eloquence to his formal training as a lawyer to such a degree that he asked Hippolyte to meet all the Iranian diplomats that were traveling through Paris and defend the interests of the faith, as well as clarify the positions of the faith on important questions. Friends, Hippolyte Dreyfus had a special function during the ministry of Abdu'l-Bahá, in that he was really, in essence, Abdu'l-Bahā's diplomatic spokesperson. And every time he had one of those meetings, Abdu'l-Bahá would write and congratulate him on his success, encouraging him to exert himself to show as much tenderness and kindness as he could to all the Iranians he met in Paris. This is typical of the encouragement of Abdu'l-Bahá. He will validate what you have done, encourage your spiritual qualities in having accomplished them, and then lovingly encourage you to do something different. And the something different right now is show tenderness and kindness to all the Iranians, not Baha'is, not non-Baha'is, just all Iranians that you meet in Paris. Even in this letter, at some point, Abdu'l-Bahá says, bravo to you. That's extremely cheerful. And it's confidential, so we do not know what he talked about, but I think that that's very sweet that he said bravo to you. So love is in the air, ladies and gentlemen. The friendship between Laura Barney and Hippolyte Dreyfus has been blossoming for several years. They traveled to Persia together. They translated some answered questions in French together. He collaborated with her on the translation of her play God's Heroes about the martyrs of the faith in 1848, 1852. And those are original photographs of the first edition of that play. The book, I believe, is embroidered. I think that's embroidery. And then inside, all the pages are illuminated. So do you see what a beautiful edition of the book that is? That's really beautiful. And both of them are extremely close to Abdu'l-Bahá. They both have an individual relationship with Abdu'l-Bahá, and both of them have been on pilgrimage to the Holy Land many times. And perhaps most importantly, Hippolyte and Laura are deeply enkindled, and they spend all their energies, every moment of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year, working on serving the faith and serving Abdu'l-Bahá in that order. So on the 24th of April, 1911, they marry after having asked Abdu'l-Bahá for his blessing. And Abdu'l-Bahá had responded quickly and enthusiastically. And they honeymooned here. And this is one of the beautiful photographs I thank the National Spiritual Assembly of France at the beginning for. This is a beautiful resolution of a photograph of Hippolyte Dreyfus's family house in Switzerland called Dar es Salaam. Dar es Salaam is like a different transliteration of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Anyway, a few days after their wedding, Abdu'l-Bahá writes to Hippolyte and Laura stating that in reality, each of them occupied all their time in service and prayed for the confirmations of the kingdom of Abha for their success. And from this point forward, Hippolyte and Laura are going to be inseparable. They're going to become a powerhouse team, like a power team, powerfully dedicated to one objective, serving the faith and serving Abdu'l-Bahá. So I have no story about this photograph, and I have no date, and I have no information. But when I was devouring Yann Ballager's fantastic book, I just stopped on this photograph of Hippolyte Dreyfus feeding a goat. And I thought, I have to put that in my presentation because and I specifically asked for permission from the National Bahá'í Assembly of France to put this in the presentation, actually, because I just thought that I like to think that Laura took the picture, Laura Dreyfus-Barney, and she was taking a picture of her absolutely beloved husband. I like to think that it was during their honeymoon that she took that picture. And I like to think that it was in Switzerland near their house of Dar es Salaam. And I really like to imagine the pictures, the colors, the white of the goat, the white of the hat, the white of the pants, the green of the grass, the blue of the sky. And really just a disciple of Abdu'l-Bahá doing a nice thing, I think that him feeding a goat is just like one of those things where, of course, because he's so nice, he would feed a goat, because I fell in love with him so much. And this picture just encapsulated his tenderness, and that was one of the things that made Laura fall in love with him. He was a very, very patient man. He was very tender. He was just very polite. And there's like this attitude of almost like he's like interacting with the goat, he's like, hi goat. It's just, it just made my heart explode. And I spent too long on the goat photo, so I'm going to go on to the next part. Part 6, Abdu'l-Bahá in France. Oh, people, this is very, very exciting, very exciting. So on the 6th of August, 1911, when Abdu'l-Bahā's ship, l'Orénoque, this is his ship, friends. This is the l'Orénoque. I found the picture on the internet. When the ship dropped anchor in Marseille, Hippolyte was the first one to welcome to France, and they would be inseparable. Hippolyte served Abdu'l-Bahá every moment. He organized his speaking engagements, took him out to relax. He accompanied him on his daily walks, and he was his principal interpreter. This is Thonon-les-Bains. I think this slide was given to me by one of the believers in Thonon-les-Bains, probably Monsieur Daniel Caillot. So thank you very much, Daniel. This is where Abdu'l-Bahá arrived on the 21st of August. And many important things happened in Thonon-les-Bains. If you want to read more about this period in Baha'i history, go and find Juliet Thompson's diary. She has many, 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 many entries about Thonon-les-Bains. And even though Abdu'l-Bahá was very, very busy with interviews and correspondence, he still found time to spend with Hippolyte and Laura. I mean, Hippolyte and Laura were two people that were individually dearly loved by Abdu'l-Bahá. So when they got married, it was just like light upon light. I mean, he was spending time with, and he is going to spend as much time with them as he can, whenever he can. When he's in Paris, when he's in America, he loves spending time with them. They both made the effort of learning Persian to speak to him too. That's an important point. One of the most, they had a lot of shared jokes, inside jokes. And now this is a place that I've been to, people, and it was very scary and very dangerous. And the the steps to go down to this waterfall are very steep and very wet. And it's like you're going to kill yourself at every single moment. And this was in 2021 that I went there. Now it's not as dangerous as when it was back then, but Abdu'l-Bahá scaled those steps, wet steps to go down. We could have lost him. That is such a dangerous thing to do. It is really, really steep, very steep. But this is one of the things I love about Hippolyte is that he always found a way to make Abdu'l-Bahá happy wherever he was. So in Thonon, he would take him in his car and drive him through the beautiful countryside. And then one day, Hippolyte, Laura, and Juliette with Abdu'l-Bahá went on an exposition to Le Pont des Gorges du Diable, the Devil's Bridge Gorge. And this is it. This is exactly how dangerous it was. It's a rock-faced waterfall that's extremely dangerous. It's about 45 minutes away from Thonon-les-Bains. But one of the things that was really amazing in Juliette Thompson's diary was that as they arrived and they got out of the car, Abdu'l-Bahá was surrounded by children who were selling such huge bouquets of violets that they covered the master up to his waist in fragrant violet blossoms and children. So two of the things Abdu'l-Bahá loved the most, kids and flowers. So Thonon-les-Bains, so this place here, this beautiful Hôtel du Parc, is also where Abdu'l-Bahá on the 23rd of August, 1911, met Zilus Sultan, the son of Nasruddin Shah, and had that deeply moving interview with him and his sons, which you can read about in the chronology in part 5 of the extraordinary life of Abdu'l-Bahá. So now Paris in the winter of 1911 is Abdu'l-Bahá's first visit to Paris. He arrives there on the 3rd of October, 1911. And after he gets moved to his apartment, he goes straight to Hippolyte and Laura's home. He had just come from England. So as soon as he arrives, he goes to Hippolyte and Laura's home and rests for a few days and then moves to his apartment near the Eiffel Tower, which is now open for visits and has been completely refurbished. And he's going to give his morning talks, which we know as Paris Talks. So he's going to stay in Paris for 9 weeks, and Hippolyte is his constant companion. He is the main point of contact for all the friends who want to meet the master. He organizes meetings, welcomes the flow of visitors that is uninterrupted. He is the main interpreter for Abdu'l-Bahá, and he introduces the master to those who come to listen to him speak. And this is when Abdu'l-Bahá comes as often as he can, almost every Friday, or as often as he can, to Hippolyte and Laura's home to attend their regular Friday spiritual evenings. And when he attends, the friends have the unbelievable bounty of hearing him. Sorry, I just need to drink a little. If you could say something. John, I apologize. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so when he comes to these evenings, Abdu'l-Bahá chants prayers. And it seems like from the recollections of people who were there, it was very, very intimate. And then to hear Abdu'l-Bahá chant in this intimate gathering was just an extraordinary blessing. Then on the 2nd of December, 1911, Hippolyte boards a train and accompanies Abdu'l-Bahá all the way to Marseille in the south of France. He crosses the country with him just to make sure he gets on the steamer to go and rest in Egypt, because Abdu'l-Bahá always spent the winters in Egypt when he was in Europe. The coldest months of the year he spent in Egypt and Alexandria. Part 7, Abdu'l-Bahá in the United States and Europe. So in 1912, after wintering in Egypt, Abdu'l-Bahá goes to the United States, and Hippolyte and Laura arrive in New York after Abdu'l-Bahá. But then they have two reunions. One is they reunite in New York after Abdu'l-Bahá has been to Washington, D.C. And then after several months, they go to other places in America. So does Abdu'l-Bahá, and they reunite again in New York, and they attend a marriage that's officiated by Abdu'l-Bahá. Oh, sorry, that was the picture. Apologies. There you go. And then after the United States, Abdu'l-Bahá goes on to Liverpool. And that's after 239 days in the United States. He boards the Celtic, the colorized photograph that's on the left. And the first person to greet Abdu'l-Bahá is Hippolyte Dreyfus in Liverpool. And do you know what Abdu'l-Bahá does? He plants a kiss on each of Hippolyte Dreyfus's cheeks when he sees him. He kisses him on both cheeks. And that vignette, I just love it, because to me, it's this wonderful warmth of the Eastern man who can hold hands with his friends and kiss his friends. And it's just normal because it's affectionate cultures. And then this French man who's a PhD in law, who's French, and French men do not hold hands and they do not kiss each other. You know, at the time it wasn't the same, but just, I love this vignette. And this newspaper article actually mentions Hippolyte Dreyfus. You can see Monsieur Hippolyte Dreyfus had come from Paris to meet the master, and a group from Manchester, Liverpool, and Leeds. So he makes the paper. He makes the paper. In 1913, Abdu'l-Bahá spends 7 months in France and short visits in Germany, Hungary, and Austria. And Hippolyte is at his service every moment he spends in Paris. One of the things I love about Hippolyte is that they find imaginative ways to relieve Abdu'l-Bahā's burdens. The first 2 pictures in black and white are an exposition of an exhibition in 1913 of the Natural Horticultural Association in Paris. And they brought Abdu'l-Bahá there to show him thousands of fruit trees, plants, and flowers arranged in color in outdoor displays. And because they knew how much Abdu'l-Bahá loved Mary Magdalene, they invited him to a play on the life of Mary Magdalene in France. And that, my friends, is the book, the book that they give the people that go to the theater. I found it on the National Library of France. That's the play. It even says the year, actually. So more books. After Abdu'l-Bahá leaves, Hippolyte stays very busy. He publishes Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, and he also attends the 6th Congress for Religious Progress. In his 4-page speech, Hippolyte makes such extraordinary point that he gets a salvo of applause, and his address is published in the conference report. So he does a variety of things. He attends conferences, he writes books, he translates, he gives talks, he travels, he encourages, he defends the faith. In 1913, Hippolyte and Laura stay in Washington, D.C., and then they travel throughout the southern part of the United States. And Hippolyte's such a curious person. When he arrives to El Paso, Texas, he takes a train across the border to see the effects of the Mexican Revolution. Then, at the request of Abdu'l-Bahá, they traveled to San Diego and Los Angeles to warn the Baha'is and encourage them in their steadfastness against the actions of the covenant breaker, Dr. Farid, who's been sowing discord in the communities. So, again, at the request of Abdu'l-Bahá. Part 8, Hawaii and Asia. You see at this point how much they are traveling. They're traveling non-stop. They're traveling like Martha Root traveled. So on March 7th, 1914, Hippolyte and Laura arrive in Honolulu, and their arrival is announced in the Honolulu Star Bulletin. And Stephen Collins, thank you very much for getting the clipping for me. This is the Honolulu Star Bulletin personal notice, and it says, a well-known attorney of Paris, France, H. Dreyfus-Barney, with Mrs. Dreyfus-Barney, were passengers in the Pacific Mail liner Mongolia en route to the Far East, who decided to remain some weeks at Honolulu. And they decided to stay some weeks at Honolulu because they were enchanted with Hawaii. It was beautiful, luxuriant vegetation, delicious temperature, the volcano landscape, and they toured all the different islands of the archipelago. They also met with the many Baha'is in Hawaii before setting sail for Japan, where they arrived 10 days later. And this is a beautiful photograph, Hippolyte standing next to the porters. And I don't think that that's Laura Dreyfus-Barney in there. I think that's somebody else, but From Yokohama, where they land, they go to Tokyo, where they're not so excited. And then they travel through Nikko, Miyanoshita, Hakone, Mount Fuji, and then arrive in Kyoto. And in Kyoto, they are completely won over because it's so authentic with these dazzling lacquer temples. It's just so beautiful. It wins their heart. Then they travel to Busan, Korea, and they're starting to hear rumors about the First World War. So they go to Beijing by train, and the city is a shock to them. It's massively crowded streets, chaos of shapes and colors, misery, poverty everywhere. They cannot talk to Chinese people. So they, against the advice of everybody, they go to Jehol province and they meet and teach the faith to Chinese people. And from Beijing, Hippolyte and Laura travel to Qingdao, which is now on martial law. They escape by train to Shanghai and they return to the United States, where they came through Japan. Part 9, World War I. So this is a photograph of Hippolyte with his regiment. He is circled. They return to a devastated Paris. Every building is a refugee center. The parks and the gardens house livestock. Everyone they meet has lost someone. There is misery everywhere. Hippolyte, because of his phenomenal language skills and his diplomas and military rank, is affected to a postal service in Marseille, where he's going to monitor communications. And Laura is going to sign up as a volunteer for the Red Cross. And she is going to comfort the wounded, amputated soldiers and those who are suffering from PTSD. She's also among those who founded the very first children's hospital in Avignon. Hippolyte and Laura spend the war apart, but they find time to meet in Marseille when they can. The only thing they have in mind is just the war ending and them getting reunited with Abdu'l-Bahá, which they are able to do. And if we're keeping track of firsts, Hippolyte and Laura in March 1919 are the first Western Baha'is to see Abdu'l-Bahá after 4 years of World War I. So the couple spends a few days in Abdu'l-Bahā's company. They visit Mount Carmel. They spend time praying, they're spiritually renewed, and they receive many instructions from Abdu'l-Bahá. And they spend a lot of time with Persian believers in Haifa. And this is very important, friends, because I think unless I do think they stop by a few days, but this is the most time they're going to spend with Abdu'l-Bahá before his passing. The next time they come is just going to be for a few days on the way back to Asia again. So part 10 is the Tablets of the Divine Plan. As a little introduction, as you know, the Tablets of the Divine Plan were revealed by Abdu'l-Bahá in the midst of the most tense part of the World War I. And 5 of them were mailed during the war, and then communication broke down. And the last 8 were hand-carried by Ahmad Sohrab, I think, to New York, where they were unveiled. And one of the little girls who unveiled the tablets was the future wife of Shoghi Effendi. So these tablets of the divine plan are basically what we are doing in the 9-year plan. The Baha'i community will be putting into practice the tablets of the divine plan of Abdu'l-Bahá, which is the first teaching plan of the Baha'i dispensation for the rest of, for 1,000 years probably. And everything that we do is somehow built on the tablets of the divine plan. So Hippolyte and Laura visited Abdu'l-Bahá in the Holy Land. When they were visiting him, the tablets of the divine plan were being unveiled. This added to the fact that Laura hadn't seen her American family for 5 years. They went to the United States, and Hippolyte decided to travel to all of the places mentioned in the Tablets of the Divine Plan in the Caribbean. He got visas for Costa Rica, Chile, Peru, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Cuba, and Panama. But we don't know where he went. We are missing information. We do know from Yann Ballanger's incredible research that he traveled through at least Cuba and Panama. The rest, we are not sure. But he is one of the very few people, along with Martha Root and the Hyde and Clara Dunn and 2 ladies who went to Alaska, when a handful of people, very few people, rose up to apply the tablets of the plan right away. And Hippolyte Dreyfus is one of the first, again, one of the first who ever did that. By April 1920, they are in Tunisia. They were entrusted by Abdu'l-Bahá with a very special mission. Hippolyte Dreyfus was instructed to, 1, encourage the local, 2, meet French colonial authorities. Sorry, can we mute? There's like some noise. Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Not a problem, not a problem. After they toured the Americas, Hippolyte and Laura sailed to Tunisia, and Abdu'l-Bahá asks them to encourage the local believers, meet French colonial authorities, and address the situation of the Baha'i community in their territory, and 4, facilitate the arrival of Persian Baha'i teachers into Tunisia from North African countries. So because these pioneers couldn't receive any money to settle, Hippolyte Dreyfus had to help them choose people who had a job or who had a skill so they could start earning money. People like carpentry, weaving, tapestry. And these efforts directly contributed to the growth of the Baha'i faith in North Africa and by extent into Africa, because a lot of these people ended up pioneering into the rest of Africa after implanting themselves in Northern Africa. In July 1920, Hippolyte and Laura, who are making preparations for another trip to Asia, welcome Shoghi Effendi, who is 23 years old. This picture is probably taken around that time. And Shoghi Effendi was traveling through France on his way to Oxford for his studies. Tragically, he will never see his grandfather again because the family didn't cable him to return at once. They sent him a letter, which arrived way too late, and he was never able to see and speak to Abdu'l-Bahá again. But from here, he's very joyful because he's just left his grandfather. He's on his way to Oxford, and the whole community is very excited to see the grandson of Abdu'l-Bahá. He speaks to a gathering of friends in his immaculate English. He reads a tablet revealed by Abdu'l-Bahá, introducing him to the European Baha'is. Friends, this is called credentials, Baha'i credentials. Abdu'l-Bahá sent his grandson with Baha'i credentials to Europe. So he reads them his credentials, and the master showers praise in the same tablet on Ali Quli Khan and his wife and the Dreyfus-Barney couple. Hippolyte and Laura now arrive on November 15th, 1920, 1 year before the master's passing, and stay on pilgrimage for 10 days. This is the last time they're going to see Abdu'l-Bahá. And this is maybe Hippolyte's 5th or 6th pilgrimage. I forgot to keep count. They give a conference aboard the steamer, and then they arrive in the Pacific Islands, Pacific Islands of Southeast Asia. They arrive in Sumatra on December 13th, 1920. They continue to Java, and they spend 3 weeks traveling through jungles, lakes, and rivers. They see beautiful people of diverse faiths living together with Arab merchants, and they spend 10 days in Bali and then a week in Singapore, and then sail to Indochina, which we now know as Vietnam. But Indochina also included Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So they were major goals of the Tablets of the Divine Plan. So Hippolyte and Laura, who want to do everything they can to help with Abdu'l-Bahā's Tablets of the Divine Plan, they stay there for a while, and they meet the king in Phnom Penh. And then they travel to Angkor Wat because they also love to see the sights as well. I mean, they were very artistic and they were very sensitive to beauty. So they never lost an opportunity to see something life-changing in the places that they visited. They returned for 6 weeks to Vietnam, where Hippolyte made very important contacts and met them over meals and taught the faith to hotel residents. Then they traveled for 2 weeks in Hanoi and Vietnam, the northern part of Hanoi. And this is where Laura gets very, very sick. Her fever spiked to 40 degrees Celsius, that's 104 Fahrenheit, but she cannot be diagnosed, and she's confined to bed for 5 weeks. By the end of June, Laura is recovered, and they spend the 3 months of summer in southern China at a place of high elevation, 6,000 feet, 1,800 meters, called Yunnan Phu. In September 1921, they go to Guangzhou, Hong Kong, then Wuchao, which is a famous pirate lair, and then they head to Burma. And when they arrive in Burma, 16 years after Hippolyte's first trip, they hear that Abdu'l-Bahá has passed away. So they immediately cable the Holy Land. They travel at great speed they arrive in Calcutta, which is where the steamer lets them off. right here. The steamer lets them off, and they receive cables that they are to head to the Holy Land. And so they cross all of northern India, 2,000 kilometers, 1,200 miles in a single month. They arrive in Ahmedabad and they meet Gandhi, the Gandhi, but it's one of his days of silence. So they only exchange messages with him on paper. And then finally, they board a steamer from Bombay and they arrive in Haifa on the 15th of August, 1922, to a very new world center, a world center without Abdu'l-Bahá. Part 11, Services to Shoghi Effendi. So Shoghi Effendi was 24 years old. And even though he was crushed under the weight of sorrows and boundless grief, he still organized an international group of very erudite and very deepened and very steadfast Baha'is, who are all in the pictures above here. You can see there's a Hippolyte and Laura, Dreyfus-Barney, Lady Blomfield, Imogen Hogue, Ethel Rosenberg, Roy Wilhelm, Mountford Mills, Alice and Albert Schwartz, Charles Mason Remy, Wesley Tudor Pole, later joined by Corinne True and Syed Mustafa Rumi. And they spent 6 weeks in Haifa. And I think one of the things that they were discussing was, do we elect the House of Justice now? And everybody wanted to do it now. And little by little, the Guardian, who was infallible, managed to explain to people, you can't put the roof of the house without walls sustaining it. And we need to have local assembly and national assemblies. And that is how the 10-year crusade is going to start happening, like a couple of decades later. So, yeah. So they're still in the Holy Land in 1922, and they spend exquisite moments with the Guardian. They see the portraits of the Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Bahá unveiled. They attend celebrations. The Guardian chants with his angelic voice. And then Hippolyte starts working in earnest for the Guardian. And he starts traveling and doing intensive teaching trips through Europe in response to the Tablets of the Divine Plan. He visits all these countries that are mentioned in the Tablets of the Divine Plan. Germany, England, Corsica, Denmark, Scotland, Spain, Ireland, Italy, Norway, the Netherlands, Portugal, Switzerland. And his mission is twofold. He has to clarify the establishment of administrative institutions, and he has to encourage the Friends in their teaching work. Friends, this is the kind of work that Hands of the Cause did. Protection and propagation. This is the kind of work that counselors do. This is the kind of work that he was asked to do, because Hippolyte, if nothing else is clear, is a highly skilled person and highly capable and highly efficient and highly productive and highly organized. And so Shoghi Effendi must have known how much, because he read a letter publicly to the Baha'is of Paris that had a special note in there about how special Hippolyte was. And so he knows that he's going to use him, and he is going to use Hippolyte. You're going to see how he's going to use him. So by July 1925, Hippolyte and Laura are in Greenacre at Shoghi Effendi's request to attend the 17th annual convention of the Baha'is of North America. And that is the 17th annual convention. It's a little bit too bright to see the details, but that's the exact convention that they went. This is just a little sidebar that Martha Root traveled a lot, and she made a ton of Baha'i contacts. But because she was constantly traveling, do you know who she relied on to follow up and teach her contacts? Hippolyte and Laura. She would send them addresses and introduce her to the most receptive of the Friends. And then Hippolyte and Laura would send them literature, a lot of it published by Hippolyte, whose work was now translated into French, English, and German. So these are just pictures of Martha Root on teaching trips with people she met. Shoghi Effendi, like his grandfather before him, stayed in constant contact with Hippolyte and closely followed his work. And he always updated Hippolyte on the state of his health, which Hippolyte insisted on being informed about. In his responses to Hippolyte, Shoghi Effendi was uncharacteristically candid about how he felt, about the sufferings he was enduring, and he would explain to him how the Swiss helps, what they had come to mean to him. It was his second homeland, a refuge where he could find solace in the nooks of those attractive mountains, where he could attempt to forget the unbearable atmosphere of Haifa and the unbearable sufferings that were his lot, with the covenant breakers especially. And this is a picture of Shoghi Effendi in his early guardianship in the mountains of Switzerland, walking through a field of wild narcissus above Lake Geneva. This is very special work that Hippolyte did. It used his legal competence and sharp diplomatic acumen several times. And in 1926, Shoghi Effendi invited Hippolyte to Haifa to discuss the legal status of the Baha'i community in Egypt, something that he had been working on for the past several years. In Egypt, as in most Muslim countries, all laws on personal statutes like marriage, divorce, civil rights are administered by religious tribunals and are only available to recognized religions. So Islam and maybe Christianity, maybe. Baha'is are forced to renounce their faith in order to access their civil rights. So to get married or to get divorced, they have to renounce their faith. Then they have to go through the religious tribunal as a Muslim and divorce and get married. So the previous year in 1925, the High Court of Appeals in Biba, Egypt, annulled the marriage of 3 Baha'i men, declaring the Baha'i faith distinct and irreconcilable with Islam. Even though it seems like a bad thing from the outside, these 3 Baha'is' marriage is annulled. Actually, it's a good thing because it's in Muslim court stating that the Baha'i faith is so different from Islam that it's an independent religion. So the Guardian designated this annulment of these 3 marriages as a historic event. Shoghi Effendi asked Hippolyte and Mountford Mills to travel to Egypt and ask the Egyptian authorities to legitimize the local verdict at the national level. So the local court of Biba, they wanted that to make it like a national verdict so that nationally the faith would be recognized as a different religion. So they were able to speak to the prime minister, the interior minister, and the British high commissioner. And the success of the mission was entirely due to Hippolyte's extraordinary sense of analysis and diplomacy. Hippolyte was really preoccupied with Shoghi Effendi was very preoccupied with the house of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, where Baha'u'llah had lived between 1856 and 1863. They needed to assert the right of the Baha'is to the keys that had been seized by enemies of the faith in the 1920s. And between 1921 and 1926, the case was presented before the Court of Justices of the Peace and the Court of Appeals of Baghdad. And Shoghi Effendi was so preoccupied with this problem that in a single period of 6 months, he exchanged 100 cables between him and Hippolyte and Mountford Mills. And the procedures are very complicated, and you really have to look at the book to really see that this is a very exciting chapter in the book. But the Hippolyte and Mountford submitted the case of the Holy House to the League of Nations on November 11th, 1928, and they upheld the right of the Baha'is to possess the keys. It was a great victory, but the battle would last for several more years. So it wasn't finished, but it was still the beginning of a great victory. Another thing that Hippolyte really helped the Guardian with was his judicial and negotiation skills to safeguard Baha'i property in the Holy Land. And so these are just various photos, not necessarily of properties that Hippolyte helped with, just photos of the Holy Land in the 1920s. And this is the type of work that he would do. He would use his legal knowledge to protect Baha'i holy places from falling into the hands of the covenant breakers. This is really high-level protection of the faith. Friends, we are arriving at our last part, the passing of Hippolyte Dreyfus. If you're very surprised, you are right to be surprised. He died young. So when Shoghi Effendi lost his closest collaborator, John Eslamont, and that is him with John Eslamont in 1921 in Oxford, he was his secretary. He was a very able man. He turned to Hippolyte and he said, I'm looking for someone capable, reliable, hardworking, methodical, meticulous, devoted, humble, knowledgeable, a sharp secretary. And Hippolyte would be perfect for that. But he was getting sick and he was spending more and more time in his house in Switzerland. So despite his failing health, he continued to publish translations and a 3rd volume of writings of Baha'u'llah, a revised copy of the Kitab-i-Iqan, the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Bahá, the Kitab-i Ahdas. He gave numerous talks, kept a voluminous and uninterrupted correspondence with souls in search of truth. He did many teaching trips, had a weekly gathering in his home, and kept in touch with all the libraries of Europe, from France, England, Germany, and the United States, systematically mailing them new editions of his books and newly published books. This is a task that Abdu'l-Bahá had told him was, in several tablets, had told him was very important. A few weeks after leaving a hospital in Paris, Hippolyte Dreyfus passed away suddenly on December 20th, 1928, at the age of 55. His sudden death was a shock to everyone. In a private letter to Laura, Shoghi Effendi touchingly said, "I will always regret not having realized the gravity and despair that surrounded the illness that afflicted him, that I failed to demonstrate more fully the feelings of deep and constant attachment that I have always cherished in my heart for him." Hippolyte was buried the next day in the Montmartre cemetery chapel where both his parents were laid to rest. This is the caveau familial, the family tomb. The same day that Shoghi Effendi wrote that letter, he also sent 2 cables from the Holy Land on behalf of him and Bahiye Khanum, the greatest holy leaf, the daughter of Baha'u'llah, expressing affection and support for Laura. And on top of the 2 cables, he wrote another long letter addressed to Laura Khanum, in which he said that never since the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá had he and his family, that was 7 years ago, never had he and his family been so devastated by a feeling of loss and heartbreaking pain as when they were informed of Hippolyte's passing. Do you see how much the family loved him? When Shoghi Effendi published the list of disciples of Abdu'l-Bahá on pages 84 and 85 of the Baha'i World, Volume 3, Hippolyte's name was the 5th one on the list. And if I may point out something that I discovered that I think is very special, it shows how much Shoghi Effendi valued Hippolyte Dreyfus and how much Abdu'l-Bahá valued him. Every single disciple on the list is qualified with one major contribution to the faith. They are the first of their nation. They are the establisher of the faith. They're the first establisher of the faith in a certain country. And most of them are outstanding teachers, outstanding defenders. They have one major quality. And you can see here, distinguished author, first Baha'i in America, noted Baha'i teacher, founder of Green Acre, noted teacher of Tarbiyat School, first Baha'i in the Negro race in America, ardent establisher of the cause in America. But Hippolyte Dreyfus, who's surrounded here, is qualified with 3 attributes, not one. He's the only one in the list. I checked all 19 names. Hippolyte Dreyfus is the only one that has 3 attributes to his name. 1 is author, 2 is translator, 3 is international promoter of the faith. And you know what's not mentioned? The fact that he's the first French Baha'i. Now, friends, if you wish to leave at this point, I finished my presentation. I just have to share something, is the epilogue, which is very important, and I absolutely have to read it in its entirety. And it's only 1 page or 2 pages, but you can leave if you want, but I am going to read this, even though I know I'm going to be a little bit over the time. Shoghi Effendi, on top of the 2 letters and 2 cables that he wrote to Laura, and many more probably other ones, he himself penned the obituary for Hippolyte Dreyfus. And it's long and it's beautiful and it's touching and it's amazing. And I've rarely read something like this that the Guardian has written himself, but you know, I'm sure there are others examples. This one is dated December 21st, 1928. And let's just check when Hippolyte Dreyfus passed away. That was it was written the day after he passed away. So in 24 hours from the time that Shoghi Effendi found out that Hippolyte Dreyfus died, he wrote a 4-page eulogy, 2 letters and 2 cables to Laura Dreyfus-Barney. So I'm going to start reading it now. Dearly beloved brothers and sisters in Abdu'l-Bahá, with feeling of profound sorrow, I am moved to address to you these few lines, mourning the loss which the cause has undoubtedly sustained by the passing of one who for many years and in circumstances of exceptional significance rendered the sacred threshold distinctive and inestimable services. The hand of divine decree has removed by the death of our talented and dearly beloved friend, Monsieur Hippolyte Dreyfus-Barney, yet another outstanding figure of the cause of Baha'u'llah, who by his brilliant gifts of mind and heart, as well as by the diverse achievement of his life, has truly enriched the annals of God's immortal faith. A pioneer of the cause of Baha'u'llah, ever since its celestial light first warmed and illuminated the West, he has, by his close association with the person of Abdu'l-Bahá, by his contact with all sections of society, by his scholarly presentation of the faith and fundamentals of the faith, and lastly, by his unforgettable share in the settlement of the complex and pressing issues that called for expert assistance in the days following Abdu'l-Bahā's passing, achieved a standing which few have as yet attained. The days of his spiritual communion with Abdu'l-Bahá and his household within the walls of the prison city of Akka, wherein he imbibed the principles he later so ably expounded to the peoples of the West. His preeminent role and his return to Paris in kindling the torch, which is destined to shed eternal illumination upon this native land and its people. The link of abiding fellowship which he forged with our Persian brethren in the course of the historic mission entrusted to his charge by our beloved. The seeds which he scattered far and wide during his subsequent travels to the heart of Asia, throughout India, beyond the remotest villages of Burma, and as far as the eastern confines of Indochina. The able support he lent in its initial intermediary stages of the case of Baha'u'llah's house in Baghdad, his unhesitating intervention with state officials in paving the way for ultimate emancipation of our Egyptian brethren from the yoke of Orthodox Islam, the stimulating encouragement his visit caused the Baha'i community of Tunis on the northern shores of Africa, and last but not least, the ability and diligence with which he applied himself to the solution of the delicate and vexing problems of the Holy Land in the critical years following Abdu'l-Bahā's ascension, all stand out as memorable landmarks in a life that as varied as in its international aspects as it was rich in its spiritual experience. His gifts of unfailing sympathy and penetrating insight, his wide knowledge and mature experience, all of which he utilized for the glory and propagation of the message of Baha'u'llah, will be gratefully remembered by future generations who, as the days go by, will better estimate the abiding value of the responsibilities he shouldered for the introduction and consolidation of the Baha'i faith in the Western world. Suffering as he did in his last days from the effects of a slow and painful illness, he bore heroically his share of the afflictions of the world and is now in the realms of blissful deliverance, partaking his full share of the goodly reward which he certainly deserved. To me, and particularly amid the storm and stress that have agitated my life after Abdu'l-Bahā's passing, he was a sustaining and comforting companion, a most valued counselor, an intimate and trusting friend with much emotion and the deepest sense of gratitude. I supplicate at the holy threshold and request you to join with me in prayers for the spiritual advancement in the realms above of a soul who, by the sheer merit of the signal services he rendered, already deserves to rank highly among the departed faithful. May he forever rest in peace. December 21st, 1928. Thank you, friends.